When it came to snipers in Vietnam, in particular Marine snipers, much is made of their marksmanship. But one of their most important aspects was intelligence and reconnaissance.
Marine Sergeant Carlos Hathcock is very widely respected as one of the most accomplished snipers of the Vietnam War. He was thought to have been the most accomplished with 93 kills, but there was another Marine by the name of Chuck Mawhinney who actually had 109. There's no rivalry there. It's not I'm better than you. It's just factually he had 10 more kills. But Hathcock was quite a character. Jim Land had recruited him. Jim was a Marine Corps captain at the time. He was a longtime competitive shooter with the Marine Corps rifle team. He was distinguished both rifle and pistol. He actually put Carlos through a 3-day sniper school in Hawaii before Vietnam. Jim Land was very frustrated that there was no sniper school in the Marine Corps at the time, so he took it on his own initiative to do a course in Hawaii. And from there, Hathcock went on to be on the Marine Corps rifle team, and he won the Wimbledon Cup 1,000-for-1,000-yard shooting in 1965 at Camp Perry. Well, when he gets to Vietnam, Jim Land learns about it, and he tracks him down, and he brings him in as one of his instructors and then one of his snipers. At that time, the Marine Corps did not have a sniper rifle per se, but Captain Land knew that they had some really good quality precision rifles, bolt guns, Winchester Model 70 heavy barrels, but they were chambered in 30-06. So he got his hands on some national match 30-06 ammo. And from Okinawa, he had shipped over some of those competitor 30-06 rifles, and that is what Carlos Hathcock carried into combat with a Unerdal precision scope. That is what he had the first time during his first tour. Later, the Marines acquired, because finally the whole Corps realized at headquarters, there is some profit to be had by deploying snipers in Vietnam. So they acquired the Remington Model 700 and the 3-9 Redfield scope, which Redfield was a very cutting-edge scope company in the 1960s. The only visual difference for that Redfield scope was that it was green in color. Otherwise, it was identical to the civilian scope, and it had AccuRange. That is that by rotating the magnification back and forth, you were also moving two little lines in the field of view, and those lines represented 18 inches on a target. Zooming in back and forth, picking out, let us say, an enemy, you could learn the distance. And then they used holdover. Both Hathcock and Mawhinney, which he was a little later generation, they were using holdover back then. That is, they zeroed for a particular distance, and if the target was closer, they held low, and if the target was farther, they held high. It was not like the high-speed, computer-generated rotating knobs or using a Horus reticle. So there was a lot of skill and judgment and experience that went into making those kinds of shots.
Want to know what's happening at American Rifleman? Follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook. We'll be right back. Even though 1965 was the official U.S. entry into what we now call the Vietnam War, there had been fighting going on there for a long time. The area of Vietnam was a French colonial possession, and there was a nationalist insurgency. Before the Japanese arrived, that nationalist insurgency was resisting the French. After 1945, the country was divided into North and South Vietnam, and the North was supplied by the communist bloc. The South was supported by Western democracies. The French suffered a horrible defeat at the hands of the Vietnamese in 1954 at Dien Bien Phu. there were lots of French guns in the country. You have guns like the 86 Lebel, you have Berthier carbines, you have the Moss 35, you have the 38 submachine gun, chambered in 7.5 French long, and you have the Model 49 in 7.5 French autoloader. You also end up with homemade guns. Whenever people want to fight an occupier, they end up making stuff. The National Firearms Museum has a collection of handguns that were essentially made by hand, rough copies of the French Moss pistol, rough copies of the 1911. The National Firearms Museum also has an M1 carbine that's been chambered for 7.62 Tokarev with a complete redesign of the gun. How well such things work, don't really know. No, I'm not willing to shoot any of them, but then again, I'm not being occupied by anyone.
Towards the end of the first year of the war, we began to encounter larger enemy formations, and the weapon that they seemed to have more than anything else was the SKS. And finally, one day, one of our patrols, when I was the S2 of the battalion, made contact with a couple of VC and killed them, and they had the first AK-47 that I'd ever seen. Now, I'm sure they were used other places around I Corps before the spring of '66, but that's the first one that I saw. And I can recall clearly taking the magazine out of that gun and looking at the way the magazine was built and commenting to my intelligence sergeant, we're in trouble. An AK-47 magazine appears to be bloody indestructible.
SOG was the Covert Operations Special Operations Unit for all classified missions across Southeast Asia. We were armed depending on where we were going. That is because for much of the war, our presence in Cambodia was deniable. The United States didn't want any evidence that we were operating there, so we were required to carry foreign weapons. As a minimum, I had, for purposes of deception, I had my point man, who was an indigenous soldier dressed up like a North Vietnamese with chest web gear and carrying an AK, because that would buy us like maybe 10 seconds, 20 seconds in a firefight for an accidental contact with the enemy. We had the benefit of knowing we were in their backyard. Anybody you encountered was bad. The North Vietnamese, although they had established recognition signs, like maybe they wore a little scarf or had their sleeves rolled up a certain way, but they were never quite sure. They knew they'd be in big trouble if they shot up some of their fellow soldiers, so they'd want to confirm, and usually that was about a 10-second advantage, so we could open up first, unless they had detected your approach and they were laying an ambush. But usually we confused them enough that it was a benefit. SOG was a small organization. For the actual operators, we had recon teams at 3 locations. At any given time, we only had about 6 teams that were operational due to casualties. In 1969, we had in excess of 100% casualties for those Americans. And the reason was because it was extremely hazardous operations, but both the members, the individuals serving in those slots were wounded or killed, and a number of their replacements were wounded or killed. Virtually everyone I know in recon has a Purple Heart. Out of those 3 command and control elements that had recon men going in Laos, Cambodia, it resulted in 57 American Green Berets missing in action in Laos. A number of them were what called KIA BNRs, killed in action, body not recovered, because the situations became so hazardous, so absolutely life or death, that you had a friend, a teammate die on you. And the only way to preserve the rest of the team was to leave that body behind and take off. Otherwise, the whole team would have been wiped out. We had, as I said, 57 MIAs, and we had 14 teams that disappeared behind enemy lines. We had 10 teams that were overrun and wiped out. In total, we lost, missing and killed in action, 300 Green Berets in Laos and Cambodia. But we came away very proud for what we'd done.